What is the name of the early Jurassic mammal that is now extinct?
The fossil site of the mammal Hadrocodium wui was in Yunnan Province, China. This newly described mammal is at least 195 million years old. The estimated weight of the whole mammal is about 0.07 oz. 2g. Its tiny skull was smaller than a human thumbnail.
Why are some strains of bacteria pathogenic and other strains not?
Strains of bacteria possess genetic differences. These differences are not sufficient for them to be considered as separate species, but each strain is distinctive. For example, 98 there are many different strains of Escherichia coli, E. coli. Some, such as E. coli 0157H7, cause serious diseases, while others live in the intestine and can be considered beneficial, as they aid digestion.
What are some products derived from secondary xylem, wood, and secondary phloem, bark?
More than 5,000 products are made from secondary xylem and phloem from the trees that grow in the United States. The greatest number of products use lumber, including fences, telephone poles, homes, furniture, flooring, sports equipment, oars, skis, bats, bowling pins, croquet balls, pool sticks, and musical instruments, violins. Lumber is also used to make veneers, plywood, and particle board. Other products derived from wood are pulp and paper, fuel, wood-burning stoves, charcoal, fabrics, ropes, spices such as cinnamon, dyes, drugs, quinine, taxol, and tannins.
Can an RNA sequence be made into DNA?
Yes, it can. A process known as reverse transcription can convert an RNA sequence into DNA by using an enzyme known as reverse transcriptase. First observed in retroviruses like HIV, reverse transcriptase has also been identified as playing a role in the copying of DNA segments from one site to another in the genome.
What is the struggle for existence?
As noted by Thomas Malthus, 1766–1834. More individuals are born than can possibly survive due to limited resources. Therefore, there is a struggle for existence. We can think of this as the competition between individuals, of the same species or between species, for food or hiding places or other necessary resources. The origin of this phrase can be traced back to the Greek philosophers but is perhaps best described by Alfred Lord Tennyson's, 1809–1892, phrase, "Nature red in tooth and claw."
What protects the shoot tip as it pushes through the soil?
Many seedlings form a bend or hook in their hypocotyls to protect the delicate shoot tip. The shoot tip is pulled rather than pushed through the soil.
What are the 4 phases of the bacterial population growth curve?
The 4 phases of the bacterial population growth curve are, lag phase, exponential phase. Also called logarithmic, stationary phase, and death phase, also called decline. During the lag phase there is no increase in cell numbers. Although the bacteria are synthesizing enzymes present in their environment in preparation for the exponential phase. During the exponential or logarithmic phase, the bacterial population grows at a rate that doubles the population during the generation time. The stationary phase incurs neither an increase nor a decrease in the cell population. The population growth cannot continue at the exponential rate since the nutrient supplies have been depleted and waste products have accumulated. The final phase of the bacterial population growth curve is the death phase, during which more cells die than are replaced by new cells.
What is torpor?
Torpor is a short-term decrease in body temperature and metabolic rate. Animals such as hummingbirds and bats go through daily periods of torpor that allow them to reduce their energy requirements at night or when hunting is poor. Torpor can be considered as a type of brief sleep, but it is distinct from a state from hibernation.
What is the root cap?
The root cap is a thimble-like mass of parenchyma cells that covers and protects the growing root tip as it penetrates the soil. The root cap is pushed forward as the root tip grows longer. The cells on the periphery of the root cap are sloughed as the root cap is pushed forward and new cells are added by the apical meristem. The root cap protects the apical meristem, aids the root as it penetrates the soil, and plays an important role in controlling the response of the root to gravity, gravitropism.
What organisms are included in the kingdom fungi?
Members of the kingdom fungi range from single-celled yeasts to Armillaria ostoi, a species that covers 2,200 acres, 890 hectares. Also included are mushrooms that are commonly consumed, the black mold that forms on stale bread, the mildew that grows on damp shower curtains, rusts, smuts, puff balls, toadstools, shelf fungi, and the death cap mushroom, Amanita phalloides. Of the bewildering variety of organisms that live on the planet Earth, perhaps the most unusual and peculiarly different from human beings are fungi. Fungi are able to rot timber, attack living plants, spoil food, and afflict humans with athlete's foot and even worse maladies. Fungi also decompose dead organisms, fallen leaves, and other organic materials. In addition, they produce antibiotics and other drugs, make bread rise, and ferment beer and wine.
Do bacteria ever reproduce sexually?
Although sexual reproduction involving the fusion of gametes does not occur in bacteria, genetic material is sometimes exchanged between bacteria. This is done in 3 different ways. The first method is a transformation in which fragments of DNA are released by a broken cell and taken in by another bacterial cell. The second possibility is a transduction in which a bacteriophage carries genetic material from one bacterial cell to another. Lastly, conjugation in which 2 cells of different mating types come together and exchange genetic material is also possible.
How were bacteria involved in World War I?
During World War I, the British needed the organic solvents acetone and butanol. Butanol was required for the production of artificial rubber, and acetone was used as a solvent in the manufacture of the smokeless explosive powder cordite. Prior to 1914, acetone was made by the dry heating, pyrolysis, of wood. Between 80 and 100 tons of birch, beech, or maple wood were required to make 1 ton of acetone. When the war broke out, the demand for acetone quickly exceeded the existing world supply. However, by 1915 Chaim Weizmann, 1874 to 1952, had developed a fermentation process by which the anaerobic bacterium Clostridium acetobutylicum converted 100 tons of molasses or grain into 12 tons of acetone and 24 tons of butanol. British and Canadian breweries were converted into acetone and butanol factories until new fermentation facilities could be constructed. Commercial acetone and butanol were made by this fermentation process until they were replaced by cheaper petrochemicals in the late 1940s and 1950s.
How do we know the energy needs of different organisms?
The basal metabolic rate, BMR, of an organism refers to the amount of energy needed while resting, to maintain normal life processes. BMR is determined by measuring an organism's production of heat or carbon dioxide, or by analyzing oxygen consumption. An organism's BMR can vary according to a variety of factors, including age, gender, size, body temperature, the surrounding environmental temperature, available food quality, hormonal levels, the time of day, activity levels, and the amount of oxygen available.
Who was Erasmus Darwin?
Erasmus Darwin, 1731–1802, was the grandfather of Charles Darwin, 1809–1882. Erasmus was a physician, inventor, and natural scientist who published a book on his ideas. Zoonomia, between 1794 and 1796. Zoonomia contained poetic couplets describing Erasmus Darwin's ideas about science and, in particular, the evolution of life. Erasmus Darwin's hypothesis was that all the animals on the planet had their origin in a vital spark that set in motion life as we know it. In his posthumously published book Temple of Nature, 1803, Erasmus Darwin further speculated on a theory of evolution that included basic ideas on the unity of organic life and the importance of both sexual selection and the struggle for existence in the evolutionary process. Years later, in writing a biography about his grandfather, Charles Darwin acknowledged that his grandfather's ideas had influenced his thinking.
Which birds lay the largest and smallest eggs?
The elephant bird, Epiornis maximus, an extinct flightless bird of Madagascar. Also known as the giant bird or roc, laid the largest known bird eggs. Some of these eggs measured as much as 13.5 in, 34 centimeters, in length and 9.5 in, 24 centimeters, in diameter. The largest egg produced by any living bird is that of the North African ostrich, Struthiocamelus. The average size is 6 to 8 in, 15 to 20.5 centimeters, in length and 4 to 6 in, 5 to 15 centimeters, in diameter. The smallest mature egg, measuring less than 0.39 in, 1 centimeter, in length, is that of the vervain hummingbird, Melissuga minima, of Jamaica. Generally speaking, the larger the bird, the larger the egg. However, when compared with the bird's body size, the ostrich egg is one of the smallest eggs, while the hummingbird's egg is one of the largest. The kiwi bird of New Zealand lays the largest egg relative to body size of any living bird. Its egg weighs up to 1 pound (0.5 kilograms).
Do animals cry?
Crying in response to emotional distress has been documented only in humans. However, many animals, particularly the young, Demonstrate their response to distress by changes in vocalizations and movement. While tear production, the lacrimal response, is found in a number of animals, but not crocodiles. The tears are used to maintain the cleanliness and moisture of the eyes and not to display emotion.
How does cyanide affect cells?
Cyanide acts by inhibiting the enzyme cell's need for oxygen utilization. Without these enzymes, a cell cannot produce ATP and will die. People can be accidentally exposed to cyanide. Very small amounts of cyanide naturally occur in some foods and plants. For example, cyanide is present in cigarettes and in the smoke produced by burning plastics. Cyanide is also used to make paper and textiles, clean metals. Separate gold from its ore, and in the chemicals used to develop photographs. Pesticides used in ships and buildings may also contain cyanide.
What are ribozymes?
Ribozymes are often referred to as molecular scissors that cut RNA. They were discovered in the early 1980s by Sidney Altman, 1939, and Thomas Seck, 1947. Who won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for their work in 1989. The ability of ribozymes to recognize and cut specific sequences of RNA allows certain genes to be turned off. Ribozymes are now being used in human genetic studies.
How many different types of neurons are found in nerve tissue?
There are three main types of neurons: sensory neurons, motor neurons, and interneurons, also called association neurons. Sensory neurons conduct impulses from sensory organs, eyes, ears, surface of the skin, into the central nervous system. Motor neurons conduct impulses from the central nervous system to muscles or glands. Interneurons are neither sensory neurons nor motor neurons. They permit elaborate processing of information to generate complex behaviors. Interneurons comprise the majority of neurons in the central nervous system.
How does the term negative feedback apply to metabolism?
Negative feedback is a cellular process that is similar to the manner in which an air conditioner operates. An air conditioner can be set to a certain temperature, and when the surrounding air reaches the set temperature, the air conditioner shuts off. Negative feedback is part of the homeostatic process through which cells conserve energy by synthesizing products only for their immediate needs.
How does a plant become a fossil?
Fossilization is dependent upon where organisms grow and how quickly they are covered by sediment. Rarely do paleobotanists find the fossil remains of whole plants. Usually only fossilized parts of plants are found. Fossilization occurs in many different ways. Three common methods of fossilization are compression, impression, and molding or casting. Compression fossils are often formed in water, where heavy sediment flattens leaves or other plant parts. The weight of the sediment squeezes out water present in the plant tissue, leaving only a thin film of tissue. An impression fossil is an imprint of an organism that is left behind when the organism's remains have been completely destroyed, leaving only the contour of the plant. Fossil molds and casts are formed when animal or plant tissues become surrounded by hardened sediment. The tissue then decays. The hollow negative created by the tissue is called a mold. When fossil molds fill with sediment over time, the sediment often conforms to the contours of the mold, resulting in a fossil called a cast.
What invertebrate lives in both marine and fresh waters and is one of the most important of all animals?
Copepods, tiny crustaceans, are the link between the photosynthetic life in the ocean or pond and the rest of the aquatic food web. They are primary consumers grazing on algae in the waters of the oceans and ponds. These organisms, among the most abundant multicellular animals on Earth, are then consumed by a variety of small predators, which are eaten by larger predators, and so on. Virtually all animal life in the ocean depends on the copepods, either directly or indirectly. Although humans do not eat copepods directly, our sources of food from the ocean would disappear without the copepods.
How is alcohol produced?
The type of alcohol found in alcoholic beverages is known as ethanol. Ethanol is produced by yeast through the process known as alcoholic fermentation. During the breakdown of glucose to harvest energy, cells generate ethanol as a way to recycle a molecule that is crucial to metabolism. Interestingly, yeast can only survive in media, like beer or wine, that contain less than 10% alcohol by volume. This means that beverages with an alcohol content greater than 10% have been fortified with additional alcohol or have been distilled. Distillation involves the boiling off and then the condensation of the ethanol, which evaporates at a lower temperature than water.
What types of tissue systems are found in plants?
Vascular plants have three tissue systems: the vascular tissue system, the ground tissue system, and the dermal or epidermis tissue system. The tissue systems are found in all parts of the plant: the roots, stem, and leaves.
What property makes skunk cabbage unique?
Skunk cabbage, Spathymophytitis, blooms while there is still snow on the ground. The root of the plant acts like a metabolic furnace, providing heat to the flowering shoot. It melts the surrounding snow as it pushes up through the frozen ground. Plant botanists have been unable to identify the cause of this phenomenon. Different theories have been proposed, with some experts believing it is a special adaptation for the cold weather climate, and others speculating that it is an evolutionary remnant of a feature of a tropical plant.
What is anthropomorphism?
Anthropomorphism is the attribution of human characteristics and feelings to non-humans. An example of this is Bambi, a story written by Felix Salten, 1869–1945, in 1923. The inspiration for the story came from the wildlife he saw while vacationing in the Alps. When the story was eventually made into a Disney movie, Bambi had become a talking animal, complete with human feelings and emotions. Anthropomorphism can obscure the true motivation for an animal's behavior.
Which first aid measures can be used for a bite by a black widow spider?
The black widow spider, Latrodectus mactans, is common throughout the United States. Its bite is severely poisonous, but no first aid measures are of value. Age, body size, and degree of sensitivity determine the severity of symptoms, which include an initial pinprick with a dull numbing pain, followed by swelling. An ice cube may be placed 252 over the bite to relieve pain. Between 10 and 40 minutes after the bite, severe abdominal pain and rigidity of stomach muscles develop. Muscle spasms in the extremities, ascending paralysis, and difficulty in swallowing and breathing may follow. The mortality rate is less than 1%, but anyone who has been bitten should see a doctor. The elderly, infants, and those with allergies are most at risk and may require hospitalization.
Do all birds fly?
No. Among the flightless birds, the penguins and the ratites are the best known. Ratites include emus, kiwis, ostriches, rheas, and cassowaries. They are called ratites because they lack a keel on the breastbone. All of these birds have wings but lost their power to fly millions of years ago. Many birds that live isolated on oceanic islands, for example, the great auk, apparently became flightless in the absence of predators and the consequent gradual disuse of their wings for escape.
Do all females take care of their offspring?
While females are the most common primary caregivers, in some species, e.g. sea orzes, males are the primary caregivers for their offspring. Male parental care may be as simple as defending the nest against potential predators, or as time-consuming as providing food and the shelter of their bodies for young hatchlings. In other species such as guppies, no parental care by either sex is provided.
Are giant redwood trees found only in California?
Although redwoods extend somewhat into southern Oregon, the vast majority of giant redwoods are found in California. The closest relative to this form of redwood is the Japanese cedar found in regions of Asia. This tree grows to a height of 150 feet 45.7 meters, with a circumference of 25 feet 7.6 meters. There are two species of the genus Sequoia, which are commonly known as the redwood and big tree. Both can be seen in either Redwood National Park or Sequoia National Park. At the latter park, the most impressive tree is known as the General Sherman tree. It is 272 feet 83 meters tall, has a diameter of 32 feet 9.75 meters, and a circumference of 101 feet 30.8 meters. The weight of the tree is estimated to be more than 6,000 tons. Other trees found in Sequoia National Park exceed 300 feet 91.4 meters in height but are more slender. The General Sherman tree is about 4,000 years old, the oldest living thing next to the bristlecone pine. Approximately 150 million years ago these giant trees were widespread across the northern hemisphere. While the size of these giant trees implies that they are composed of very strong wood, the opposite is true. The wood is useless as timber because it is brittle and shatters into splintery, irregular pieces when struck. Perhaps the weakness of the wood is why so many of these giant trees still survive and have not been harvested by the logging industry.
Why do some biologists consider the insects the most successful group of animals?
With more than 1 million described species, and perhaps millions more not yet identified, Class Insecta is the most successful group of animals on Earth in terms of diversity. Geographic distribution, number of species, and number of individuals. More species of insects have been identified than of all other groups of animals combined. What insects lack in size, they make up for in sheer numbers. If we could weigh all the insects in the world, their weight would exceed that of all the remaining terrestrial animals. About 200 million insects are alive at any one time for each human.
What is crossing over?
When sister, homologous, chromosomes line up during the early stages of meiosis I. Segments of DNA may be moved from one chromosome to another when the two strands overlap. This process is known as crossing over. Since gene sequences cross from one chromosome to its sister chromosome.
What is the function of chloroplasts?
Chloroplasts are the structural and functional units where photosynthesis takes place, the process whereby green plants use light energy for the synthesis of organic molecules from carbon dioxide and water, with oxygen released as a byproduct. They contain the green pigment chlorophyll, which traps light energy for photosynthesis.
What is unusual about the way the emperor penguin's eggs are incubated?
Each female emperor penguin, Aptenidites fursteri, lays one large egg. Initially, both sexes share in incubating the egg by carrying it on his or her feet covered with a fold of skin. After a few days of passing the egg back and forth, the female leaves to feed in the open water of the Arctic Ocean. Balancing their eggs on their feet, the male penguins shuffle about the rookery, periodically huddling together for warmth during blizzards and frigid weather. If an egg is inadvertently orphaned, a male with no egg will quickly adopt it. 2 months after the female's departure, the chick hatches. The male feeds it with a milky substance he regurgitates until the female returns, now padded with blubber. The females take over feeding the chicks with fish they have stored in their crops. The females do not return to their mate, and own offspring, however, but wander from male to male until one allows her to take his chick. It is then the male's turn to feed in open water and restore the fat layer they lost while incubating.
How do salmon find the way to their spawning grounds?
Scientists do not know exactly how a salmon remembers the way back to its native stream. After an ocean journey possibly lasting several years and covering several thousand miles, they agree, however, that salmon, like homing pigeons, appear to have an innate compass or search recognition mechanism that operates independently of astronomical or physical signs. Some scientists theorize that this internal compass uses the infinitely small electrical voltages generated by the ocean currents as they travel through the Earth's magnetic field. Others believe that the salmon's homing mechanism may take its cues from the varying salinities of the water or specific smells encountered along the journey.
How does a dominant trait differ from a recessive trait?
A dominant trait is one that is expressed whenever present, either as a homozygous genotype, DD, or a heterozygous one, DD. In other words, dominance means that a heterozygote carrying only one copy of the dominant allele will display the dominant phenotype. The term dominant does not infer that this is more normal or common than a recessive trait. In contrast, recessive phenotypes always result from a genotype in which alleles are alike. Recessive traits seem to be more common in a population than dominant traits. Sometimes an allele is a no-signal message, meaning that no functional polypeptide will be made from its expression.
What are simple stains?
Simple stains highlight an entire microorganism so that cellular shapes and basic structures are visible. Simple stains commonly used include methylene blue, carbolfuchsin, crystal violet, and safranine. A stain is applied to a fixed smear for a certain amount of time and then washed off, and the slide is dried and examined.
How can the environment affect genes?
Some genes are sensitive to temperature. An enzyme that controls the synthesis of black pigment. Melanin in Siamese cats is only active at cool temperatures. The cooler the body part, the darker the pigment. Since the body is warmer than the extremities, it remains lighter in color. During the winter, if your Siamese cat goes outdoors, the fur may become darker. Siamese kittens are usually white due to the warmth of the mother's body.
Who is considered the founder of experimental zoology?
Abraham Tremblay, 1710 to 1784, a Swiss scientist, is considered the founder of experimental zoology. Much of his research involved studying the regeneration of hydras.
How can chromosomes become damaged?
Chromosomes can become damaged physically, in their appearance, and molecularly, in the specific DNA sequences they contain. Chromosomes can break randomly or due to exposure to ionizing radiation, which acts like a miniature cannonball, blasting the strands of DNA. Other factors such as physical trauma or chemical insult can also cause breaks. When a chromosome breaks, the broken part may then reattach to another chromosome, a process called translocation. Sometimes the broken chromosomes may attach to each other, forming a ring. Any type of chemical change is known as a mutation.
Which organelles contain DNA?
DNA is found in nuclei, mitochondria, chloroplasts, and some centrioles.
What is the tree of life?
Darwin envisioned a tree of life with branch tips representing currently living species and the base as the common ancestor of all. As one moved from the tips toward the trunk, one would pass the common ancestors for each species group. This idea is still under debate today as researchers try to determine how and how often life has evolved on Earth.
How are mushrooms grown commercially?
The most common, commercially grown mushroom is the white button mushroom, Agaricus bisporus. Mushroom farms consist of special planting beds in buildings with temperature and humidity conditions that are controlled. The beds contain soil mixed with a material that is rich in organic matter. The beds are inoculated with mushroom spawn, a pure culture of the mushroom fungus grown in large bottles on an organic-rich medium. The mycelium grows and spreads throughout the soil mixture for several weeks. Mushroom formation is induced by adding a layer of casing soil to the surface of the bed. Mushrooms appear on the surface of the bed through a process known as a flash. Mushrooms must be collected immediately after flashing, while they are still fresh.
Which mycotoxin is found in certain agricultural products and is believed to be carcinogenic to humans?
The fungus Aspergillus flavus produces toxic aflatoxins. This mold is found in soil, decaying vegetation, grains, cereals, hay, corn, peanuts, sweet potatoes, rice, and animal feed. It is believed that products contaminated with aflatoxins are carcinogenic to humans.
What were the Beagle voyages?
The HMS Beagle was a naval survey ship that left England in December 1831 to chart the coastal waters of Patagonia, Peru, and Chile. On a voyage that would last 5 years, Darwin's job as unpaid companion to the captain on board the Beagle allowed him to satisfy his interests in natural history. On its way to Asia, the ship spent time in the Galapagos Islands off the coast of Ecuador. Darwin's observations there caused him to generate his theory of natural selection.
What is the difference between magnification and resolution?
Magnification, making smaller objects seem larger, is the measure of how much an object is enlarged. Resolution is the minimum distance that 2 points can be separated and still be seen as two distinct points.
What is the structure of the plasma membrane?
The plasma membrane is a thin membrane that surrounds and defines the boundaries all living cells. It consists of a double layer, bilayer, of phospholipids with various proteins attached to or embedded in it.
Who was the first primate taught to use sign language?
Although it was long known that primates use a number of methods of communication in the wild, early attempts, from 1900 to the 1930s, to teach primates simple words were failures. A 1925 scientific article suggested sign language as an alternative to verbal language in communicating with primates. In the 1960s, researchers tried to teach chimps and gorillas a modified form of sign language. It began with Washoe the chimpanzee, followed by the gorillas Michael, now dead, and Coco. Washoe learned a little over 100 signs. But Coco has a working vocabulary of over 1,000 signs and understands about 2,000 words of spoken English.
What is the biological basis for DNA fingerprinting?
DNA fingerprinting, also known as DNA typing or DNA profiling, is based on the unique genetic differences that exist between individuals. Most DNA sequences are identical, but out of 100 base pairs of DNA, two people will generally differ by one base pair. Since there are 3 billion base pairs in human DNA, one individual's DNA will differ from another's by 3 million base pairs. To examine an individual's DNA fingerprint, the DNA sample is cut with a restriction endonuclease, and the fragments are separated by gel electrophoresis. The fragments are then transferred to a nylon membrane, where they are incubated in a solution containing a radioactive DNA probe that is complementary to specific polymorphic sequences.
What animal has the largest home range?
The home range of an adult polar bear may cover an area of 20,000 square miles, 50,000 square kilometers. This is an area about the size of Nova Scotia in Canada. The home range of each polar bear varies due to food availability and condition of the ice.
What is coevolution?
Coevolution is a rare form of evolution. By definition, it requires that two species adapt to evolutionary changes occurring in each other. An example of this reciprocal adaptation would be the development of mutualistic relationships between plants and the insects that prey upon them. As the plant develops defenses, like the oils of species in the mustard family, the insects develop counter-weapons. Cabbage butterflies have metabolic adaptations that can safely break down these toxic compounds.
How do yeasts differ from other fungi?
Yeasts remain unicellular, that is, as single cells throughout their life. Most species reproduce by budding, others through binary fission or spore formation. Each bud that separates from its mother yeast cell can grow into a new yeast cell. Some yeast cells group together to form colonies.
What separates humans from primates?
Morphologic and molecular studies suggest that our closest living relative species is the chimpanzee. Although some of the evidence is conflicting, we do know that analysis of protein structure in both chimps and humans indicates that approximately 98% of our gene sequences are functionally identical. Meaning that if the gene sequences differ, it is not enough to radically change the proteins produced from them. It is also estimated that our last common ancestor with the chimp would have lived at least 5 million years ago.
What are the major features shown by all vertebrates?
Animals in the subphylum Vertebrata are distinguished from other chordates by several features. Most prominent is the endoskeleton of bone or cartilage. Centering around the vertebral column, spine or backbone. Composed of separate vertebrae, showing internal metamerism. A vertebral column combines flexibility with enough strength to support even a large body. Other vertebrate features include 1. Complex dorsal kidneys, 2. A tail, lost via evolution in some groups. Extending between the anus, 3. A closed circulatory systems with a single, well-developed heart. 4. A brain at the anterior end of the spinal cord, with 10 or more pairs of cranial nerves. 5. A cranium, skull, protecting the brain. 6. Paired sex organs in both males and females. And 7. 2 pairs of movable appendages, fins in the fishes, which evolved into legs in land vertebrates.
What is kin selection?
Kin selection is a version of natural selection that measures success not just by individual reproductive effort. How many fertile offspring produced? but that also includes the number of copies of those genes that are located in close relatives. A parent and child, for example, share about 50% of their gene sequences on average.
Although plants were used as medicines in the past, has their use decreased in modern times?
Approximately 25% of all prescription drugs currently used in the Western world contain ingredients derived from plants. The United States National Cancer Institute has identified 3,000 plants from which anti-cancer drugs can be or are made. Among this group are ginseng, Panax quinquefolius, Asian mayapple, Podophyllum hexandrum, Western yew, Taxus brevifolia, and rosy periwinkle. Of the 3,000 plants used for anti-cancer drugs, 70% come from rainforests, which are also a source of plants used to treat countless other diseases and infections. However, 80% of the world's population does not use prescription drugs. Rather, this group relies almost exclusively on herbal medicines. Therefore, the medicinal use of plants has not decreased.
Which lichens are most often used by the perfume and cosmetic industries?
The musk-like fragrance and fixative properties of Avernia prunistri and Pseudavernia furfurnacea make them popular components for perfumes and cosmetics. The essential oils of these lichens are extracted with solvents E. prunistri and P. furfurnacea are common to southern France, Morocco, and the Serbo-Croatian peninsula.
When were mitochondria discovered?
In 1857 Rudolf Albert von Kolliker, 1817 to 1905, histologist and embryologist, first described sarcosomes, now called mitochondria, in muscle cells. The term mitochondrion, meaning thread-like granule, was first used in 1898. Functionally active mitochondria were first isolated in 1948. Kolliker was among the first biologists to interpret tissue structure in terms of cellular elements.
What is a stone plant?
The species Lithops turbiniformis is known by several common names, including stone plant, flowering stone, and living stone. The genus name Lithops comes from the Greek words lithos, which means stone, and opsis, meaning face or appearance. The plant is native to South Africa, Namibia, and the west coast of Africa. The plants are very difficult to see since their appearance mimics the rocks and stones of their natural habitat. They have two thick leaves and a single flower that is either yellow or white in color. Stone plants thrive in very arid conditions with minimal rainfall.
Are there differences between prokaryotic and eukaryotic ribosomes?
Prokaryotic and eukaryotic ribosomes resemble each other structurally, but they are not identical. Prokaryotic ribosomes are smaller in size, contain fewer proteins, have smaller RNA molecules, and are sensitive to different inhibitors of protein synthesis.
How often is the epithelium replaced?
Epithelial cells are constantly being replaced and regenerated during an animal's lifetime. The epidermis, outer layer of the skin, is renewed every 2 weeks, while the epithelial lining of the stomach is replaced every 2 to 3 days. The liver, a gland consisting of epithelial tissue, easily regenerates after portions are removed surgically.
What is Codes?
Codes is the FBI laboratory's combined DNA index system, which allows federal, state, and local police agencies to compare DNA profiles electronically. Codes uses two indexes: 1, the forensic index, which contains DNA profiles from crime scenes, and 2, the offender index, which contains DNA profiles of individuals convicted of sex offenses and other violent crimes.
How do T cells differ from B lymphocytes?
Lymphocytes are one variety of white blood cells and are part of the body's immune system. The immune system fights invading organisms that have penetrated the body's general defenses. T cells, responsible for dealing with most viruses, for handling some bacteria and fungi, and for cancer surveillance, are one of the two main classes of lymphocytes. T lymphocytes, or T cells, compose about 60 to 80% of the lymphocytes circulating in the blood. They have been educated in the thymus to perform particular functions. Killer T cells are sensitized to multiply when they come into contact with antigens, foreign proteins. On abnormal body cells, cells that have been invaded by viruses, cells in transplanted tissue, or tumor cells. These killer T cells attach themselves to the abnormal cells and release chemicals, lymphokines, to destroy them. Helper T cells assist killer cells in their activities and control other aspects of the immune response. When B lymphocytes, which compose approximately 10 to 15% of total lymphocytes, contact the antigens on abnormal cells, the lymphocytes enlarge and divide to become plasma cells. Then the plasma cells secrete vast numbers of immunoglobulins or antibodies into the blood. which attach themselves to the surfaces of the abnormal cells, to begin a process that will lead to the destruction of the invaders.
Do possums play dead?
The common or Virginia opossum, Didelphis virginiana, is the only marsupial in the southern and eastern portions of the United States. When threatened or frightened, the opossum will lie quite still with stiffened limbs and a fixed gaze, appearing as if dead. When the perceived threat is over, the opossum will return to its normal, nocturnal activities.
Which came first, DNA or RNA?
The first information molecule had to be able to reproduce itself and carry out tasks similar to those done by proteins. However, proteins, even though bigger and more complicated than DNA, can't make copies of themselves without the help of DNA and RNA. Therefore, RNA was the likely candidate for first information molecule because scientists have found that RNA, unlike DNA, can replicate and then self-edit.
What is a genome?
A genome is the complete set of genes inherited from one's parents. Genome sizes vary from one species to another. The final number for humans is yet to be determined.
How does brown fat differ from white fat?
Many mammals have both brown adipose tissue and white adipose tissue. They are both triglyceride lipids, but brown fat tissue has the ability to generate heat. Although called brown, it varies in color from dark red to tan, reflecting lipid content. It is most commonly found in newborn animals and in most species disappears by adulthood.
Can I see a gene?
No. A gene cannot be seen because it is submicroscopic. We can see a chromosome, which contains genes. And geneticists can pinpoint the location of a gene on that chromosome, but the actual gene cannot be seen.
When was the term dinosaur first used?
The term dinosaur was first used by Richard Owen, 1804 to 1892, in 1841 in his report on British fossil reptiles. The term, meaning fearful lizard, was used to describe the group of large, extinct reptiles whose fossil remains had been found by many collectors.
What are linked genes?
Linked genes are genes that tend to be inherited together. The human genome has 24 chromosome types and approximately 35,000 genes, therefore, at least 1,000 genes would, on average, be found on a single chromosome and travel through meiosis as a discrete unit. However, linked genes tend to be close enough that they are separated by crossing over less often than unlinked genes.
How are genes physically found in a specific genome?
Finding one gene out of a possible 30,000 to 40,000 genes in the human genome is a difficult task. However, the process is made easier if the protein product of the gene is known. As an example, if a researcher is looking to find the gene for mouse hemoglobin, he or she would isolate the hemoglobin from mouse blood and determine the amino acid sequence. The amino acid sequence could then be used as a template to generate the nucleotide sequence. Working backward again, a complementary DNA probe to the sequence would be used to identify DNA molecules with the same sequence from the entire mouse genomic library. However, if the protein product is not known, the task is more difficult. An example of this would be that of finding the susceptibility gene for late-onset Alzheimer's disease. DNA samples would be collected from family members of a patient with late-onset Alzheimer's disease. The DNA would be cut with restriction endonucleases and restriction fragment length polymorphisms, RFLPs, would be compared among the family. If certain RFLPs are only found when the disease gene is present, then it is assumed that the distinctive fragments are markers for the gene. Geneticists then sequence the DNA in the same area of the chromosome where the marker was found, looking for potential gene candidates.
Could the events depicted in Jurassic Park actually happen?
In this novel, later adapted into a film, about dinosaur reincarnation, scientists bring dinosaurs back to life by using dinosaur DNA, obtained from insects embedded in fossilized amber. There are several flaws in this scenario. One is that prehistoric mosquitoes were most likely to have digested the dinosaur blood, making the DNA unusable. Also, one would need a complete genome, not one that has been augmented with amphibian DNA, to genetically reconstruct a dinosaur. The best way that dinosaurs could be recreated would probably be by altering bird DNA. Since dinosaurs and birds are genetically related,
What parts of plants are sources for spices?
spices are aromatic seasonings derived from many different parts of plants including the bark, buds, fruit, roots, seeds, and stems.
What is molecular evolution?
The study of molecular evolution is the study of how proteins and nucleic acids change with time. Early studies on evolution were based on biogeography and the fossil record. As scientists developed techniques for studying DNA and proteins, evolutionary researchers soon followed their lead. Molecular evolution involves two broad areas: how the forces at work on individuals, e.g., natural selection, sexual selection, affect gene sequences and proteins, and how entire genomes evolve.
How did the original Celsius temperature scale differ from the one in use now?
In 1742 the Swedish astronomer Anders Celsius, 1701–1744, set the freezing point of water at 100 degrees Celsius and the boiling point of water at 0 degrees Celsius. It was Carolus Linnaeus, 1707–1778, who reversed the scale. But a later textbook attributed the modified scale to Celsius, and the name has remained.
How do aseptic procedures prevent contamination?
The goal of aseptic procedures is to keep the organisms used in an experiment separate from the millions of other organisms in the environment. These procedures focus on the way to transfer organisms from test tube to test tube, from test tube to flask or petri dish, and from petri dish to petri dish or flask.
What are Operation Ranch Hand and Agent Orange?
Operation Ranch Hand was the tactical military project for the aerial spraying of herbicides in South Vietnam during the Vietnam conflict, 1961–1975. In these operations, Agent Orange, the collective name for the herbicides 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T, was used for the defoliation. The name derives from the color-coded drums in which the herbicides were stored. In all, U.S. troops sprayed approximately 19 million gallons, 72 million liters, of herbicides over 4 million acres, 1.6 million hectare. Concerns about the health effects of Agent Orange were initially voiced in 1970. And since then the issue has been complicated by scientific and political debate. In 1993 a 16-member panel of experts reviewed the existing scientific evidence and found strong evidence of a statistical association between herbicides and soft tissue sarcoma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, Hodgkin's disease, and chloracne. On the other hand, the panel concluded that no connection appeared to exist between Exposure to Agent Orange and skin cancer, bladder cancer, brain tumors, or stomach cancer.